Thank you very much, Park. We really appreciate the opportunity to present, and we've really enjoyed listening to all the fantastic papers today. We're just so pleased to be part of this project and again, to hear all this fantastic research. Rodrigo is in the audience, and I want to thank him for all his contributions to this paper as well. So, as we've heard, food security is standardly measured at the household level through abbreviated modules or the full module. But an issue with food is that it is consumed individually, and some hardship experiences, such as skipping a meal or being hungry, are also experienced at an individual level rather than at a group level. Also, these experiences may differ across individuals within a household, with some individuals experiencing hardships and others not necessarily experiencing a hardship. We think this is especially prevalent when we consider differences between adults and children, thinking that adults may be protective of children, but even within particular groups, it could be that there are differential experiences for particular adults and differential experiences for particular children. So, for instance, work that Robert Moffat and I did a few years ago found that adolescent girls within households were less likely to be food insecure than adolescent boys. And as we've discussed when we were talking about some of the other cultural explorations of food security, parents are sometimes unaware of food hardships among children. Our study is using unique data from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, which asked both individual and household level food security questions. And we're going to use formal psychometric papers, formal psychometric methods, similar to some of the other papers that you've already seen, to develop personal food security scales separately for children, adolescents, and adults. We'll take a look at how personal and household food insecurity differ, and then we'll also take a look at the characteristics that separately predict each type of food security. So for those of you who are not familiar with NHANES is a multiple instrument survey. There are two primary components to the NHANES. The first is a individual household level questionnaire survey. And then separately, that's followed up with individual medical exams and a separate questionnaire that's administered at the medical exam. NHANES is conducted in 2-year cycles with about 5,000 people participating each year. NHANES collects data from multiple people within a household, but unfortunately with the public use data, it's not possible to link the data for household members. Again, it's a large survey, it's a national survey, and with weights, it's representative of the US population. As the name suggests, there's a large focus on health, but it also includes measures of demographics, economic conditions, family characteristics, program participation, and again, most importantly for our purposes, household and personal food security. So household food security in the NHANES is measured through the standard household food security module. This is asked of a knowledgeable adult within the household. It would be the standard 10 questions if there are no children present in the household, and 18 questions if a child is present. It's asked of all households. So unlike the current population survey, it does not use the 3-question screen. The least severe questions of the scale are asked universally, and then more severe conditions are asked only if some less severe conditions are indicated. And from this, you can form the standard 12-month household, household adult, and household children scales. Personal food security is also asked. So there are a number of hardships. These are asked conditional on some household item being affirmed, and conditional on a household item being affirmed. NHANES will ask individuals during their medical exam first about whether they cut the size of their meals in the previous 30 days. Second, whether they ate less than they should. Third, whether they experienced hunger. Fourth, whether they skipped meals. Fifth, whether they did not eat for a whole day. And then finally, whether they lost weight. The questions are, again, asked conditional on a household item being affirmed. So there is a mechanical link between the household and personal questions. The personal questions differ in that they only ask about the last 30 days. So they're similar to the short-term food insecurity questions in the CPS. As you saw, and as was discussed in the previous presentation, each of the questions asks about relatively severe conditions. So you would have noticed that there isn't a question about balanced meals or a question about worrying. So these are relatively severe conditions. And then finally, the administration of the questions differs across groups. So adults are asked all 6 of the questions that you just saw through personal interviews. Adolescents age 12 to 15 are asked the first 5 questions, so they're not asked about losing weight. They're also asked the questions with an extra condition about whether the family had a lack of resources. And then for children younger than age 12, responsible adults answer the questions on their behalf through personal interviews. One other thing to mention about the adolescents, adolescents answer through ACASI, the other groups answer through personal interviews. NHANES collects other data, so there's all sorts of person-specific measures, including age, gender, race, ethnicity, citizenship. We take a look at household measures, including the number of members in the household, the income to poverty ratio, the number of rooms in the home the household lives in, whether that home is owned by a household member, and SNAP receipt. Adolescents and adults self-report on their general health. And we distinguish between either the own or the household reference person's marital status and education. And all of the analyses I'll show you use the NHANES supplied sampling weights. So this is the incidence of household food security and food security among children in the household. All of these totals match pretty closely to numbers that are reported in the CPS. So it appears that NHANES collects the household measures at about the same prevalence as the CPS. Of more interest are the personal outcomes. And here I've got the distributions of the household incomes for children, adolescents 12 to 15, and adults. You can see that the incidence of personal hardships is very, very low among children. Only about 3% of children in the NHANES have any indications whatsoever of a personal food hardship. The incidence is much higher among adolescents, so it's about 3 times as high among adolescents, and then it falls somewhere in the middle for adults. The questions asked between never experiencing the event, sometimes experiencing the event, and often experiencing the event. You can see that reports of often experiencing hardships are very low among children, relatively low among adolescents, and occur with about a 1% frequency for adults. So to develop scales from the personal measures, the first thing that we did was just to examine the distributions of each of the items. And the thing that we were looking for in examining the distribution was to make sure that each of the items had a single mode and that each of the items looked like it was coming from a single reporting pattern. We then conducted factor analyses separately for children, adolescents, and adults. All of our measures are categorical, so we estimated polychoric correlations, and then we calculated our factor solutions based on the correlation matrices. We initially combined all of the household and personal measures. When we did that, we got a very clean two-factor solution with all of the household items aligning on the first factor, typically with loadings of 0.85 and higher, and then all of the personal items aligning on the second factor, again, with very high factor loadings on that factor. When we just take a look at the personal items, we find that those align on a single factor. The next thing that we did was to conduct a item response theory analysis of these using a graded response model because we've got ordinal outcomes. In a graded response model, the model is going to be a two-parameter model. It has a discrimination parameter. It has a differentiation parameter. The only difference here is that it has multiple differentiation parameters for each item. These are the results that we get for children. We get similar patterns of results for adolescents and for adults. For the differentiation, you can see the differentiation, differentiation goes up with the severity of the item as we'd expect. We also see a modest set of differences in the discrimination parameters. So we reject a one parameter solution in favor of a two parameter solution. This is the summary of the results that you just saw for children, taking a look at the item characteristic curves and the item information curve. Through these curves, we're able to confirm that every response from every item contributes unique information. We can also see that this scale, at least for children, is discriminating way off in the severe end of the distribution. When it came time to actually form the scales, we formed a number of alternative scales. So we formed a simple summative scale from the responses, but our preferred measure are predictions of the latent value from the IRT results. So you combine the responses with the food security item responses with the IRT results, and you can predict the latent outcomes. The advantage of using the predictions over using a simpler summative scale is that the prediction allows for differences in discrimination. And recall that we did find differences in the alpha parameters across the items. It allows for differences in the number of possible responses. This is important because one of the items that we look at is the no eat for a whole day item, which is binary. Another advantage of this approach is that it can predict from subsets of the items. So if a few items are missing, you can still predict the latent values from that. When we take a look at the correlation between this value and the simple summative scale, we get about a 90 to 91% correlation. When we change the summative measure to use standardized summative measures, which get closer at the severity, so they relax the ordinality assumption associated with the items, we get about a 94% correlation. So this is the association between personal food security and household food security. Because we don't have thresholds for our personal food security scale, what we did was we just aligned the responses into percentiles. So recall for children, only 97% of, 97% of children have no indication of personal food insecurity whatsoever. And then we took a look at the 98th percentile and then the 99th through 100th percentile. And then we see out of the children with no household indications, marginal indications, low indications, and very low indications, what the percentages of children in those categories are that are in these other percentiles. Technically, there should be, because of the conditioning, we don't expect there to be any personal food security insecurity among children with no indications. But these questions were asked if there were any types of household indications. So there are some situations where adults are indicating that they had an issue, and then they're reporting a issue for children, even though they might not have reported a household issue for children. Marginally food insecure households are households that only reported one or two items for the household scale. And we see that there are few children who are reported to have personal food insecurity or personal hardships. And then you can see that the incidence rises as we go to low food security and very low food security. One other thing to notice is that substantial numbers of children in households. So here we've got the distribution by household food security among children. Substantial numbers of children in insecure households are not reporting any incidents of food insecurity. We see similar patterns when we take a look at results for adolescents and adults. So here, adolescents, there are no indications for about 90% of sample. As we go up through the percentiles, you can see that those events get rarer, that being worse off in terms of the personal food insecurity scale is positively associated with the household scale. But again, you can see relatively high proportions of children or adolescents that aren't experiencing these personal outcomes. And we see the same patterns for adults. The next thing that we did was to run regressions using standardized measures of the household scale and using our predicted personal scale. So for the household scale, what we did was we transformed the responses into effectively standard normal units so that the responses to the household scale would be comparable to the responses to the personal scale. By and large, there are few differences between the predictors for household food security and personal food security, but there are a few differences. So one difference is that household food security among children seems to be more sensitive to the children's ages than the personal scale does. Also, household food insecurity seems to be more sensitive to characteristics of the type of household in terms of the number of rooms in the household and home ownership than personal food security. And then finally, household food security is more sensitive to SNAP receipt than personal food security is. When we take a look at the results for adolescents, relatively few characteristics are predictive of personal food security. But one thing to note is that living in a owned home has a stronger association with personal food security for adolescents than it does with household food security. For adults, we get some neat results. One neat result is that women are more likely to report being personally food insecure than men are. We don't see that pattern with the household scale. We do see an association for Black respondents for the household scale, but not for the personal scale. We also see a different age pattern for, and a more significant age pattern for the personal scale for adults than we see for the household scale. So our conclusions are that personal food security is distinct from household food security. We get strong evidence of this from the factor analysis. We see differences in the incidence and the regression results. We note that there's some things that would tie personal food security closer to household food security, especially it being asked conditional on the household items. But at the same time, there are some differences that are likely to lead to reporting differences, especially the different time frame. So again, the short-term nature of the personal food security questions. We also find and statistically confirm that the measurement of personal food security differs between children, adolescents, and adults. This may be a substantive result, but we have to be mindful that the way that the personal food security questions are administered differs across the groups. Personal food security is rarely reported among children. Only about 3% have any indication. Again, we see large numbers of people with no indications of personal food insecurity, even if they're in a household with their type of household food insecurity. And we see only a few differences in the determinants. And then finally, for future data collection, NHANES stopped collecting the personal measures in 2010. We would recommend that NHANES reinstate the personal questions. If they were to reinstate them, we would suggest asking the questions unconditionally, not conditional on the household items. We'd also recommend using ACASI for these questions to reduce social desirability bias. And then to reduce the respondent burden, we would recommend dropping the losing weight question because it's rarely affirmed and appears to have a severity that's similar to not eating for a whole day. Thank you.